Welcome back to the Felix Factor with Felix Heron. Hello, science lovers. Get ready for another thrilling episode of the Felix Factor with me, Felix Heron. This week's overarching theme is going to be the immune system, as well as autoimmune, and, problems therewith. So first we look at the 3 lines of defense. First, we have what you see, like, for example, my face, which is skin, which protects bacteria and viri and other pathogens from just entering right into my bloodstream. This is very important. This prevents most of the bacteria that could possibly get to you, and it is, the first line of defense. It also includes mucus and tears in your eyes. Pretty much just like the regular stuff that's on the outside of your body that, get out of here, pathogens. Secondly, we have white blood cells, which is our second line of defense. These are also known as leukocytes. And there are several types of these. One of them are the phagocytic ones, which basically go up to a cell, they eat it. And then they eat a lot of them, and then after eating a lot of pathogens, then they die, taking the pathogens with them, and that's what forms pus. There's bunches of dead white blood cells carrying lots of pathogens. Lastly, we have the lymphatic system, which has the B cells and T cells and all those other lymphocytes and good stuff in your body. What this does is first of all, you have the aggressive and the killer T cells, which go and personally take out the pathogens, and they also have the helper T cells, which go and tell the B cells, you should make this type of antibody. That's how it works. Now you may know that when you puncture your skin with some type of abrasion, your skin often swells up. It also heats up. Well, there's a reason for this. Swelling is caused by a chemical called histamine, which is released by your cells when you get a puncture. What it basically does
a leak
is it makes the blood vessels leakier, so that blood, the plasma containing the white blood cells, can leak into the infected tissue and thereby help eat up some of the bacteria and viri. Also, there's another chemical that causes a fever. You might have noticed that when you get sick, you often get a fever. This causes the cells to metabolize faster, and it makes them be able to, just like, putting cells on an energy drink, for example. Also, there's heparin, which prevents blood from clotting, therefore making it flow more quickly, letting more white blood cells and other lymphocytes, as well as leukocytes, get to the area to prevent the spread of a pathogen. So now we're going to look a little bit more in depth in the lymphocytes category. So as you know, there are 2 main types of lymphocytes. We've got the B cells and T cells. Now, luckily for us, these aren't that hard to remember because B is like bone marrow, which happens to be, coincidentally, where the B cells mature. T stands for thymus, which is a gland in the chest somewhere around here, in which the T cells mature. Now, there are 2 types then of responses to bad things like pathogens in your system that are executed by the lymphatic cells. First is the humoral immune response, and that is when B cells, specifically, release antibodies into the blood to hook on to the pathogens and then, kill them. Which we'll get into that a little bit more specifically in just a second. So that's how that works, and that's only the B cells. And an easy way to get immunity to a disease is to inject into you some B cells because this then lets the cells bind, and they already know, they're already pre-programmed because of the previous knowledge and stuff. That's how it works. Next, we have the cell-mediated immune response. So the way the cell-mediated response works is like this. You have, first of all, you got one type of T cell called the killer T cells. Those go themselves and they, kill off the bacteria and the viruses that are attacking. But more important, or not more important, but another portion of this has to do with the antigen receptors, which are little things that pop out of the cells after they mature in the bone marrow. And these things are programmed specifically for a certain type of bacteria or virus. And what it says is, if you see this, then either you should emit a signal so that we can start fighting that, or you can just latch onto it. And of course, there are tons of different strains of bacteria and viruses, so there are lots of different cells, and they're all programmed differently. I know you're excited to learn about the structure of antibodies, so I'm going to tell you about them. So, first of all, you might think of antibodies as in a Y shape. Well, you'd be right. And if you thought of them as in any other shape, then you're wrong. Here's the deal. You've got, on an antibody, you have the Y thing, and then the two legs on the top. So what you didn't know, probably, is that there are two different types of chains that are symmetrical on each side. You got the heavy chains, which is the ones, starts at the bottom and then it goes at the top. And then you got the light chains, which are bound to them at the top. It's kind of hard to visualize, but I'll have a handy image right here to help you out. So it works that at the top, at the V's at the top, because the V's are the variables, because they can change around depending on which, they can change around slightly depending on what kind of pathogen they meet. They can squeeze it in their little graspers, which is, of course, very helpful. A couple things you should know about antibodies. First of all, their abbreviation is IG, which stands for immunoglobulin, which is another name for antibody, apparently. And another thing I might have forgot to mention is that the intersection between the V's that actually grabs the antigens, that's called the antigen binding site. And, yeah. Oh, yes, and according to RCSB, first of all, antibodies can have multiple binding sites, which means that you have less of a strong grasp on each site, but you can have lots of different grasps on there. And also, we learned there that, in fact, when your body notices that the lymphocytes have found a bad pathogen, then the body actually does a quick multiplication of that type, and got a lot of those. You can stick them into the blood, find out that pathogen really fast, which I wasn't aware of actually, but it's interesting. So there you go. Virus works. Here we have an innocent T cell just roaming along, looking for potential pathogens infiltrating the body. Now here comes along an HIV virus. Oh no, that's bad. Well, here's the good news. Normally, when we have a T cell and it sees a virus and it doesn't know, it grabs onto it with an antibody. And it then reports it to the killer T cells to come and kill it. But what happens with HIV is that, oh no, HIV actually binds with the proteins on the outside of this helper T cell. Then what happens is it infiltrates it, and basically it takes its messenger RNA and it reverse transcribes it into its own piece of DNA, which it then inserts into the DNA of the helper T cell. Oh no, now the helper T cell is programmed to create more viruses. Eventually, after creating a ton of viruses, it dies. And now, what we have is a dead helper T cell and a bunch more viruses to go infect more innocent helper T cells. The end. However, after all the viruses have spread around and gotten rid of most of the helper T cells, we have one of the more unfortunate parts of AIDS, which also stands for the autoimmune deficiency syndrome. Yeah, so that's me. Anyway, what happens is that since there are no more helper T cells, the cell-mediated response as well as the humoral response are both very, very dampened because, of course, it is impossible for the body to get good information as to which viruses are present and which cells to duplicate and make a lot of. So, therefore, it is very difficult for the body to fight off even the small diseases, and therefore these become prevalent throughout the body if you have AIDS, even if normally your immune system will be able to fight them off. So you're much more susceptible to little diseases like that. So unfortunately, outside pathogens aren't the only way that that a disease can affect your body. There's something called an autoimmune disease, which is basically your body attacking itself. It tends to be caused by just cells that think that they are bad, so they attack them, and that's really not good. Some examples of this are lupus, which basically has B cells making antibodies against lots of different like good cells in your body, which basically makes you, cause a lot of rashes and fevers and stuff, and it's not good. And another example is MS, which has T cells reacting against myelin, which means that you can't transmit messages along your spinal cord as well, which is again a bad thing. Then we go back to immunodeficiency diseases, which is basically the lack of some important part of your immune system. For example, in SCID, it's a disease where you are missing T cells and B cells, so obviously you don't have your whole third section of your immune system, which can greatly harm your ability to stay healthy and prevent against pathogens. Unfortunately, again, not all of these are things that you can track. Some of them you're born with, something you can actually get later on in your life. For example, Hodgkin disease is a cancer that affects your lymphatic system. And yeah, so there's also some other growing research that perhaps stress affects your immune system. It makes it less functional. Now, there isn't a ton of evidence supporting this yet, but stay tuned. So our last topic today is going to be about allergies. Now, you may think you know how allergies work, but you probably don't, because I thought I did, but turns out I don't. Here's how it works. You got things called allergens, which are things in the air, for example, like pollen or dust mites, that are not they're like sensitive to your body, but if you have an allergy against it, you're really sensitive. So here's how it works. So first thing that happens is you get an allergen entering your body for the first time, and it triggers some B cells. It gets on the receptors, and then that makes more of them, which then bind to the mast cells, M-A-S-T. These are the cells that produce histamines, which makes inflammation. Now, next time it enters your body, for example, if you smell the dandelion and the next day you smell it again, what would happen is the dandelion dander would get attached to the mast cells, and they would produce histamines, and then your nose would itch up, and then you have to blow it a lot. That's basically how it works. Antihistamines are things you can take to counteract this. And then in a very bad situation, you can get an anaphylactic shock, which is a very severe type of allergy. For example, if you're allergic to shellfish or penicillin, you get an anaphylactic shock from that. So stay healthy, folks.